Welcome to Our Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? This week I am back with Road to Gold and I have two games to go over, one against the Nighthaunt and one against Seraphon, both of my Untamed beasts, and both games were pretty darn interesting. And of course I'm running a brand new list for both games, although it is the same list twice. I think it's a pretty good one. I'm pretty excited to go over it. So jumping right in, my first game was against the Print and Play Gamer, a fantastic opponent, and he was running a very interesting Nighthaunt list. He was running a Knight of Shrouds mounted, a Wielder of the Blade, a Spirit Host, and some Rasps, and I do believe there's some blessings here and there, but I can't quite remember what they were. And for me, I was running a Heart Eater, Vexmore with +1 attack, Scabig with +1 strength, a Spawn, Beast Speaker, and 3 Plains Runners. Going into this mission, I was a little bit concerned. The Nighthaunt are disgustingly fast because they have Fly and they are movement 6 at a base. And that Knight of Shrouds on Steed goes like movement 10, movement 12-ish. That guy is a nightmare to deal with. He's also very hard to kill. He's only toughness 4, but with 28 wounds and the ability to heal and a pretty decent melee profile. The guy's a bit of a beast. And of course, the Wielder of the Blade is fantastic. He has amazing damage stats and access to charge, which is not great. And Spirit Hosts are a little bit cheeky. They don't have the best damage going around, but all of the Nighthaunt get Frightful Touch. And Frightful Touch is nasty, and because the whole warband is Nighthaunt, he has the faction trait which gives his whole warband +1 strength if they move that turn, which is nasty to deal with because some of these guys go to like strength 6. That being said, my list is also pretty darn nasty. Vexmore is always a bit of a kick to the teeth. Toughness 6, 25 wounds, strength 10. Right, he's got 2 attacks with that blessing, 5, 10 damage. Dude's insane. He does a lot of damage when the dice go your way, and he's pretty hard to shift, and he is surprisingly mobile thanks to range 2 and movement 3 with the ability to go to movement 6. So he's got a pretty decent threat range there. And of course, Scabig is incredibly fast. And the Spawn being the new addition here, the Spawn is just a pile of stats. I believe he's a little bit overcosted at 170. I would like to see him like 160, maybe 150, right? But 170 is still absolutely fine. 4424 is a great melee profile. He can boost his attacks all the way to 10 on a triple. And he has 30 wounds and toughness 4, making him pretty hard to shift and movement 5. So he's pretty darn quick. He's also a beast, so that Beast Speaker can whip him to get more attacks, which is pretty darn cool too. So going into the mission, this was a custom mission. Basically, there's 4 quarters, and you get points for holding them. It is that simple, but the gimmick, the caveat, the little sprinkle of spice on there is that one of those quarters every turn becomes infested, and that infested quarter is worth more points, but also reduces your toughness whilst you're in it. And that quarter rotates around the board as the game goes on, meaning you have to move around quite a bit, which would have been fantastic for my warband normally, but against Nighthaunt, they're one of the warbands that are faster than my warband, which makes it a little bit trickier to take advantage of. Now, a lot happened in this game, so I'm going to try and keep it to the important bits. But firstly, at turn 1, I had the model advantage. I had more guys on the board turn 1, and this let me really control the board, which is the advantage of having more models on turn 1, is that in an objective game, you can take more of them, you have more control and more pressure to do what you want, and I made the decision to be a bit tricky. So my opponent didn't want to launch his Wielder of the Blade too aggressively forward because I had a Spawn, and whilst the Spawn is worse in terms of offense than a Wielder, the Spawn would very likely beat a Wielder to death just because the Wielder is so squishy in comparison. So he was rightfully nervous, especially when I had a Beast Speaker nearby, ready to whip to buff his damage even higher. So what ended up happening was my opponent played fairly passively and I played very aggressively. I even split up my Spawn and my Beast Speaker to take more objectives early, scoring a massive chunk of points turn 1 and giving me a really good lead going into turn 2. But turn 2 is where things start to get a little bit spicy. Firstly, my Beast Speaker almost immediately dies. His Knight of Shroud comes on, he just runs up there and he just decapitates that speaker like he is nothing. I believe he used Frightful Touch and that just skyrocketed his damage to insane levels, and that Beast Speaker had no chance of surviving. The Spawn continued to be very aggressive, pushing right into the middle of the board and controlling this whole center, daring him to send some more guys there. Being in the center of the board in a quarters game means I can contest all the objectives very easily. I can't hold more than one at a time as per the rules, but I can very easily move between them when needed. And to this end, I also moved up Scabic, Ahatia, and Vexmore to this central position, making a ball of death. Not many things want to get tangled up in that sort of fight. There was a lot of wounds, a lot of damage, and a lot of kill potential there. And because most of those things are heroes, if he moves incorrectly, that spawn gets to move in for free and get a free swing. Now, despite the aggressive central play, I think the most important part of turn 2 was just how I prioritized what I did. The big thing here is that his wielder of the blade was basically lined up to assassinate a planesrunner, and I didn't want to lose another model this turn. So instead of being overly aggressive and starting to do things, rushing to do things I wanted to do, instead I picked that planesrunner and he skedaddled up the board and got to safety and survived for the rest of the game. In a similar vein, I also moved other planesrunners to other parts of the board to keep them safe, whilst also contesting objectives, and really importantly, using a little bit of eyeballing, which is hard to do on TTS, and a skill you learn over time in general. I eyeballed his Spirit Host and positioned all of my pieces so he couldn't actually get in and attack. I was about half an inch out on every avenue of attack, even with Rush, so his Spirit Host kind of just chilled and didn't do all that much, and the rest of his guys just positioned to take objectives. I still managed to maintain an advantage this turn and score more points, giving a pretty sizable lead going into turn 3, but turn 3 is where things take a little bit of a turn for the worse. So my opponent noticed a weakness in my central plan, and that was the Spawn. The Spawn has a lot of wounds, but he's fairly fragile because of that toughness 4, and his guys are very strong thanks to his battle trait, thanks to Frightful Touch. And the big thing here is, if he moves next to a hero, the Spawn gets to move in for free. So what's the weakness? Moving into this Spawn, but not moving into range of the heroes. And that's exactly what happened. That wielder of the blade just flew in with Frightful Touch and almost cleaved him in half, and then the Knight of Shards came in for the finishing blow. Of course, with the Spawn being dead, it was a little bit sad, but I had a lot of guys ready to move in, so I moved in Vexmore, I moved in the Heart Eater, and a big scrap was about to happen. So once all was said and done, I was down a Spawn, he was down a fair few wounds thanks to the raw power of my killy stuff, and Scabic didn't get involved. Because Scabic's really fast, with his triple he can go 24 inches, so he is by far the fastest thing on this board. So he went around and did some objective stuff, but importantly, my opponent, after getting that Spawn kill, also scored more points this turn, as he managed to nab the infested quarter. Going into turn 4, everything just kind of dies. The Heart Eater gets killed by the Knight of Shrouds, Vexmore kills the Knight of Shrouds, the Wheels of the Blade doesn't kill Vexmore, and that's really it. It's a little bit anticlimactic, and in the end, we managed to sort of even out the score. I believe he also got the bonus points this turn as well. And in the end, despite the very dominant start, it did actually end up being a pretty close game. I only managed to claw out a victory by about 2 points. And overall, it was a great game. One mistake I definitely made was in the deployment. The Spawn has a fantastic reaction that you can make use of, which is you get a move for free and attack for free if they move next to a hero. I had no heroes with the Spawn in deployment, and I really should have. Having a hero in the deployment with the Spawn would have given me some more defensive options, allowed me to do some cheeky bait plays, and some other sneaky stuff like that. So that's definitely something I want to improve on in the future. My overall thoughts on the list was that it's pretty darn good. The one thing I'm a little bit skeptical on is that the Beast Speaker isn't great, and the Spawn is fantastic. I love a good Spawn. But the Beast Speaker is not great, but I also can't afford a First Fang, and if I did take a First Fang, then the First Fang is really arguing and competing with Scabic. They both really want those triples, and they're both really good at using those triples. Taking Vexmore and not a First Fang means I don't have the Yank and Spank, which does diminish Vexmore's effectiveness as a aggressive piece, but it does give me speed elsewhere. So there is definitely some holes in the list I can't easily fill right now. But I am enjoying this list, and I definitely want to give it another go in my next game, and that's exactly what I did going into game 2. Before I get into all that though, please be sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment down below, as well as potentially join my Patreon like all these wonderful people on screen now, Badoosh, as all of this helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon, and by extension helps support the channel. You can also help support the channel by going to Element Games Badoosh using my affiliate link. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
So game 2 is against Combo and his rather brutal Seraphon. This guy took 2 Croxigal Warspawned, a Slan Star Master, and a whole bunch of skinks. So despite the incredible amount of kill potential in this list, he still managed to meet me model for model at 8 man. I took the same list as before, but I messed around with deployments, putting a hero with the spawn, and that was basically it. And in terms of missions, this was basically reverse ley lines. It's a really fun twist on ley lines. Instead of adding objectives to the game as the game goes on, you actually remove them. There's 3 objectives and 1 gets removed every turn based on the player who's losing choosing to shut them off. So it's still a choice, but the battle does get more and more condensed as the time goes on, and you are definitely punished for overcommitting to one objective, as your opponent could just slash off the board and then you're kind of stuck in the dirt. Now, what gives this mission a little bit of spice is the added kill secondary. Basically, you get a whole bunch of points if you get the first kill of the game, and that person who got killed was next to an objective. I have a lot of planes runners in this list, and here's a Slant Star Master, and these are incredibly dangerous. Like 3 attacks, strength 4, 12-inch range, 3/6 damage is nasty, especially when you can then use like Starblood Commander or something to fire it again. It's rather nasty. So going into this game, I had a very clear plan, and that was to lock down that Star Master as quickly as possible, and I did get a little bit lucky as his Star Master was coming on turn 2. I say lucky, that does mean you just have 2 Croxicore coming on turn 1, and that's a lot of kill potential I have to deal with, but the Slan really is the issue. I can go to town on his skinks to get points that way. I can potentially brawl with these Croxicore. What I can't do is deal with the oppressive ranged shooting of a Slan who will score points every single turn effortlessly. So on turn 1, we split up, we grab objectives, and in the end, we both hold 1 and we both contest the center. And his big old Croxicore is just standing there facing off against a few planesrunners, which seems a little bit scary, but I have a sneaky plan in order. In fact, I have 2, one of which being the sneaky gambit that I talked about in my last video last week, where I do the turn 2 deployment dump, and I send my Heart Eater and a Chaos Spawn and plonk them in just the right position to lock down his Slan, meaning he will not be able to fire and start gunning down my vulnerable guys. Going on to turn 2, it was destined to be brutal as we both rolled quads, but I managed to take the initiative, and this was a big deal because I have a lot of quads in this list, and I could have done an awful lot of things to really help propel myself towards a victory, and it was difficult to decide what to do. In the end, I decided to keep it really simple and just rampage. With all the wonderful options this warband has for quads, I just rampage, and I rampage with Vexmore, who was just in range to rampage in and swing 3 times for 6 total attacks into his Croxicore from behind, and one-shot it. I rolled 30 damage overall, and that guy was completely removed. And this was a big blow to my opponent because now the center was definitely mine. His other Croxicore was on the other side of the board holding a different objective, and his Slan was locked down. Now the downside of aggressively launching Vexmore to kill a Croxicore meant that the Slan was fully operational to fire out the Heart Eater or the Spawn and potentially kill one of them, and he had a quad, making it much more likely. However, my opponent completely whiffed his rules and only hit twice out of 9 dice. Sure, he was hitting on a 4+, but even then, that is way below average and meant that the Heart Eater who he targeted didn't really care. Of course, then I started taking chunks out of that Slan with the Heart Eater and the Spawn. Now, the Slan did position himself in a way that I couldn't actually get the Spawn to attack twice because he was just out of melee range, so I moved him in, whilst also locking down the other skinks in that deployment zone. I mean, they would have to disengage if they wanted to go anywhere, which slowed them down by about 3 inches because they are movement 6. I also didn't want these skinks to escape or really survive, as skinks are notorious for being slippery little buggers, and if they were to get out, I wouldn't really be able to catch them again, and I didn't want my objectives being attacked from behind. So I made the decision to move my Beast Speaker off an objective and then pin in all of those skinks so they couldn't easily disengage, and of course you could then whip the Spawn, which he did, and then the Slan took a big old chunk of damage with the 8 total attacks from that Spawn and the 10 attacks from the Heart Eater, almost killing it outright. Now, despite my Beast Speaker pinning in his skinks, there was one of those skinks that could escape only barely, and he did. But going into turn 3, that skink was very quickly caught by Skabic and turned into a pile of lizard guts, as Skabic is prone to do. The Slan was then promptly taken care of, and the Spawn moved over to threaten his last remaining objective, and that was a mistake because despite his durability, the Croxicore War Spawn moved up and just one-shot him. He was just dead. So that was the end of the Spawn, and that was basically the end of the turn. I aggressively postured with Vexmore though positioning himself so he could face off against this Croxigo Warspawn on the objective and have a bit of a scrap at the end there. And on turn 4, my opponent took the challenge. He rampaged in, he started to swing in at Vexmore, and Vexmore survived and swung back and did 35 damage. So that was the end of the Croxigo and basically the end of the game. And this game was really fun to play. My opponent again was absolutely phenomenal. Combo was a wonderful player to play against. And this was a very killy Seraphon list. But what I think my list did well in this matchup was just pin down that Slan. This Slan was by far the biggest threat in this list, and pinning him down early with the turn 2 deployment dump won the game, basically. His skinks were still an issue, right? Having 5 or 6 skinks in this list means that he is very, very fast and very capable of just piling onto objectives and keeping them away from me. And that isn't all that great for me. So being able to pin them as well and then clean up the scraps with Skabic definitely went in my favor and definitely helped. And the Warspawn sadly didn't do all that much. Sure, the Warspawn killed a spawn, and that's fantastic. Like, spawn are fairly hard to kill, but Vexmore taking 2 of them down was a massive, massive blow. And once you lose one Warspawn, your Slan's locked down, the Slan then dies, and then the second Warspawn goes down. There's not really much left you can do, and I think my list and my plays managed to very effectively divide and conquer, split up his key pieces into little digestible sections, and then kill them one at a time when they are vulnerable. And Vexmore helped, right? Vexmore coming in and doing a total of like 70 damage on his 12 total attacks that game is insane. That's a disgusting amount of damage from Vexmore, but it's also kind of why you take the lad. He's a little bit swingy, but when that swing goes in your favor, he starts destroying the sun, he starts rending the planet asunder. He's a pretty beastly bloke, and getting a rampage turn 2 and getting into combat early, that certainly helped for sure. Overall, I really like this list. One thing I might try and mess around with going forward is dropping Skabic for a Pyrocaster, dropping the Spawn and the Beast Speaker for like a Prey Taker and a First Fang, and try and have that threat projection of Skabic be replaced by the threat projection from a long-range flying flamethrower, basically, right? And see how that goes. Skabic being super heavy on dice does limit what you have to play with turn by turn, and the Pyrocaster doesn't really need dice. He is just an effective piece on the board at all times. So I'll see how that goes. I might try that out going forward if I can get the points to line up. I'm not sure I can. But yeah, that's the end of the video. If you liked what you saw, if you like Road to Gold, let me know down below. I love making Road to Gold. Road to Gold is a really fun series to make. Just nattering, rambling about games, and just having like a bit of introspection. It's really fun to do. And hopefully you enjoy it too. This is the 8th episode in the series. And Warhammer World is rapidly approaching, because it's like the 5th of February, so it's almost here. So we'll see how the season concludes. And the real exciting part is that there's another Warhammer World event in March, which means there's going to be another Road to Gold season. Season 2 is almost here as well, as a result, going from February to March, so a much shorter period of time to see if I can prepare. And of course, please remember to hit like and subscribe. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Hey all, and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Maps, Sable Saber, Steph, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for supporting the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Ta-ra.